Hi everyone, and this is International Master Bill Paschall. Trying something here with a new concept called video chess training. And well, today I'd like to show you a position that I played in a tournament game very recently that I think that we should take a look at. This is really, really new to me. I'm playing a pretty strong IM, like myself, about the same 2400-ish rating. His name is Tatar Kish, Hungarian. Anyway, in this game he played white, and he played e4. Usually I play a lot of Sicilians, but I prepared for this specific opponent. We play a Caro-Kann. I don't really, care as much about the game itself that I'm going to show you here. I want to talk about this position that came out of the opening with everybody here in the video forum. Basically, I think this is just a really cool position to analyze. So anyway, d4, d5, and he plays ed, and after cd, c4, this is called the Panov Botvinnik attack. And it's kind of like one of the main alternatives to the main lines of the Caro-Kann. People who play this stuff are generally seeking an open game, and that's often not easy to get against Caro. So, Caro-Kann defense is tough, and oftentimes the positions are kind of blocked and just maybe semi-open. This leads to kind of queens, even more open than queen's gambit type of positions. Really a lot of pawn exchanges, but fundamentally, black has a good structure. Bigger pawn island, like all these pawns lead to a very solid kingside pawn island for black. And oftentimes there's an isolated queen pawn. So, this is kind of critical. White had to recapture away from the center with his e-pawn here, and that pawn tends to be kind of tender. So, White's opening the game a little faster, but Black's position is usually pretty stable. A lot of really strong players, especially Karpov, excelled very, very much in this line with Black. Anyway, okay, so here Black's solid move is e6. But it's not a lot of fun, your bishop just gets blocked in on c8, and play is pretty dry, and that was okay for Karpov, but sometimes you like to get something a little more interesting. So I've been working on some variations with g6 after the move knight f3, but they're sketchy, but they're interesting and catch some people off guard. That's a story for another time. My opponent here played bishop g5, and I wasn't prepared for this. It's been years since I looked at these lines, and it's not really trendy. It's not a trendy line. Everybody plays knight f3, and bishop g5 is sort of like a forgotten variation. It's good, but it's not critical, and black, black normally plays, well, different stuff. I mean, bishop e6 is kind of like a modern treatment, but my opponent seems to be comfortable in positions where you push past the c5. Kind of likes that, so I just felt like I was encouraging it. I mean, I like those structures if black can do something with the bishop on e6. If his knight's already on f3, then I can play bishop g4 after c5. But in this position, I feel like it's kind of early because after c5, I still don't know what I'm going to do with that bishop on e6. And white can play like c5, bishop b5, knight e2. Anyway, here I chose to play an old variation that nevertheless, as far as I know, has always been okay, because I felt he would be comfortable against other moves. So queen a5, and as far as I know, this has never been refuted. I mean, it's an old variation, but my analysis goes back like 20 years to a book by Egon Varnouche, which was like an all-knowing treatment of the Caro-Kann, but it covered all the main lines, and it was published in like the mid-80s. So anyway, this variation was discussed in there, and my analysis is like based on that book from 20 years ago. But in practice, I've only ever encountered like bishop takes f6, um, the main line, which goes like e takes, pawn takes, bishop b4, and now there's this piece sacrifice that's a draw by repetition. Everything goes off, and if the king goes to e2, black castles, and there's at least a draw by repetition, like castles, f3 only move, rook e8 check, king f2, queen e3 check, and it's a draw by rep. You know, if he wants that, that's okay. I mean, I'm black against an equally rated opponent, so whatever. But, white doesn't have to give a draw. I mean, he can play cd, bishop b4, and the only game I ever played was this, and this is theory, I believe. Like bishop takes c3, b takes c3, queen takes d5, when black has double pawns, but he has free development, and the pawns in the center are rough for white, and two set of minors are off the board, so it's pretty hard for white to conduct a really strong attack, and I can blockade against these isolated pawns, especially the c4 square. Knight a5 later on, focusing on the c4 square. So no, it's okay for black, and so that's fine. And there's another move that my friend Bill Kelleher always believed in, which was a3. And this move I remember never really having an easy time against. And I think a3 is pretty interesting, but this move my opponent played here, it disturbed me a lot, because bishop d2, because it just doesn't seem right. Something doesn't seem right about this. I mean, let's go back 2 moves and see what happened here. Okay, it's white's turn, and he goes bishop g5, and I go queen a5, and he goes bishop d2, and it's my turn again. So I get to put my queen on a5, and then he puts his bishop on d2, and he says, okay, your turn again. I realize that my queen is somewhat vulnerable there, but, this is like my move, and I can even... Leko played queen d8. A lot of even strong players play queen d8 here. I realize you can do that, but I don't know. And maybe it's a good move, but I just don't think it's objectively... Teb didn't used to play this a lot for white. Queen d8 it doesn't feel like the punishing the mistake that white made here, So this is where things get weird, analyzing this position. So it turns out that this has been analyzed apparently by the Hungarian IM Caro-Kann, who writes a lot for New in Chess, and he's pretty thorough. So the move actually historically goes back to being played by Bronstein and like Tal, actually, in 2 individual games. I can't understand why this move wasn't included in the book that I learned the Caro-Kann from, because the move seems kind of like, wow, it's been played by Tal and Bronstein. But maybe it was later that these guys picked that up, and I don't think that those games were so good, actually. But the problem with the position is that black has to make a decision. I mean, okay, Leko played queen d8. Most people who never saw this before may play queen d8, but my inclination was not to play queen d8. It just didn't feel like the right move. What should we do? So, well, everything is basically hinging on him threatening to play knight takes d5. I mean, he's just going to win a pawn here. So, I can't defend it with something like e6. I have to make another move. I have to resolve this thing in the center. And after the game, I don't know, Tatar Kish said something like, somebody played this. That seems sort of silly to me too. No, it's got to be like one of a couple of moves. The only possibilities here, are really serious possibilities, are of course knight takes d4. Because let's face it, I mean, this pawn is just hanging. This is one of maybe the #1 problem with the move bishop d2, is that he's not protecting his central pawn. And then the other move is pawn takes pawn, which, is good in that it creates this isolated pawn. It takes away the threat of knight takes d5 too, who resolves that threat, and my queen stays active, and I have this like lateral mobility for my queen, so it's not getting trapped or discovered on or something. But first of all, let's discuss why and everybody, because there's like 20 some, 30 some games in the database, maybe more, with this position, and nobody played knight takes d4. It's unbelievable. How could not one person have noticed that this is like a good move? It's unbelievable. I mean, I'm sure Caro probably put it on a computer and analyzed it or something, but come on, knight takes d4. Well, what I missed is what everybody else missed, probably. That after knight b5, it looks dangerous, but what does he do? After knight there, queen b6. Everybody can see that he can win a pawn back or something with, I don't know, bishop e3, e5. And black is okay, but the scary thing is c5. And then you're like, oh, I'm going to lose material, because if I play queen takes c5, he has rook c1. And can you imagine, I was actually sitting there thinking about sacking my queen and counting the material here, would this be okay? And it's just bad for black, but, almost enough material. So, no, the point is that everybody misses that you have a check here on e6. So this doesn't work for white. It doesn't work really at all. I'm going to just check, take on there, and play bishop d7. So knight takes d4 is fully playable, and it probably deserves to be played as the number 1 or 2 alternative for black. I don't know. It's unbelievable that nobody discovered that it works, But okay, the position is really weird. If you put it on the computer, instead of just the obvious knight takes d5, queen d8 with a kind of unclear resolution in the center, one computer engine played this. This knight e2 move. It's really no human would ever find this over the board, but it kind of wins a tempo of sorts. You can't pull your knight back, and you probably have to exchange it. But I guess you could even play knight c6 in this position. I mean, I actually don't see anything wrong with that. Knight c6, and if knight takes, you just go back. But here I think white, maybe still has some kind of small, tiny advantage. He can support his knight or with knight c3. But anyway, I'm shaking my head thinking that nobody's ever found that you can do that, Position's just maybe tiny bit better for white after knight takes d4. But the other thing is, okay, the game I played this. I mean, again, you can play queen d8, but the position's, it seems like white's been given something, free move with bishop d2. And things get weird after cd, knight takes d, knight f3. If you play the normal variation with bishop g4, queen b3, this is a theoretical position with white having what looks like a pretty useful move, bishop d2 thrown in. So I'm not all that certain that I want to do the same thing where white has an extra developing move in this kind of position. So here, take, and now white doesn't have any choices. I mean, he has to take back. I don't think d5 can work. So this is forced. And then this is the second critical position, where I spent a lot of time actually over the board analyzing another move that nobody's ever found. That's actually pretty good for black and pretty weird. The computer engine number 1 suggestion in this position is a little thing I learned in the accelerated dragon, because sometimes the queen's on a5 and a very similar piece configuration is happening. And this is something I borrowed from the queen a5 accelerated dragon, queen b4. And this is actually another good move for white. That I don't think that Caro went over this in his analysis. Absolutely critical here is knight d5, queen takes c4, knight c7 check, king d8, when black has really good play. At the time I wasn't sure about it, but in retrospect it looks like really very good for black. Even with the bad king, we put the queen queen doesn't go anywhere. It just goes to d5 and holds everything together. We're not going to grab pawn on a2 or anything like that. It stays in the long diagonal, and it keeps white in check, so to speak. So, like here, let's say, I don't know, okay, b6, that's actually important. If he does something like rook c1, we play this. And the point is, after something like knight f3, bishop b7, castles, maybe he'll take the pawn. I don't know. Like knight takes b6, a takes b6, whatever you want. Castles. This is important here because, as we looked at with a friend of mine, you got to keep him honest on the long diagonal. Otherwise, this move will kill black. Knight e5, just like trading off the knight on c6 and threatening the black king and stuff. So, but it looks like black's just better. It's not easy because it's really imbalanced, but I don't think that most good players are going to go into this for white. And black has the dynamic advantage. So black has the initiative, let's say. White is basically, he can't play queen e2 because of knight takes here. At the time, I was a little scared of bishop b3. But on that move, actually, you can take your pick. I mean, you can actually take this pawn with the knight or with the queen, and both are playable. So things get really weird here, and, what can he do? Bishop b5 was another computer suggestion, but it just doesn't look really good for white. So, really, queen b4, I think white's best is b3. It's a bit ugly, but not the end of the world. I mean, white is not playing for beautiful static advantages here. He is playing for dynamism, and he has a pawn on d4 that's takeable, but it's dangerous. Things get pretty messy after knight takes d4, but there's a trap in the game that I want to show you. That if I take this pawn, see, knight takes d4, the problem is that after knight b5, queen d8, I've never seen this trap in my life. It's kind of weird. Knight takes d4, queen takes d4, queen a4 check. And if you play bishop d7 or anything, you lose to bishop takes f7 check. Or if you play queen d7, you lose to bishop b5. So it's pretty ugly. And if you play king d8, well, one guy actually did that, and well, you don't want to talk about what happens after that, and like rook d1. So, it's a funny trap, but the thing is, after b3 now, how this changes the position, this suddenly is takeable now. It's takeable because there's no queen a4 check. So if he tries the same nonsense with knight b5, you can actually play queen c5, and this, there's an escape here with queen e5 check, and it seems scary at the time to go into this, but analyzed in the cold light of day, it's okay for black. A little scary, but probably black is fine, and he just has to be extra careful. So white has some compensation. So what? Queen b4 is pretty good, but anyway, it looked kind of dangerous. So after deep thought, I played this, and didn't want to have to do it because Tal played d5 actually. There was a game with d5, and after this, and then queen d8, and it looks like here, my plan was like bishop g5, bishop e7, and I think that black is okay again, but it's a little unpleasant for black, but nothing critical. But if you don't play d5, you risk having a backward pawn on the d file. So after e6, my opponent played just knight f3, and then here again, most people chickened out. There's even one game with like not Matulovic, but another Marovic or some strong Serbian grandmaster played like bishop e7, knight d5, queen d8, and knight takes here, and like knight takes here, and it's pretty okay for black actually. It's a little passive, but and then like bishop g5, and you let him take on f6, and still there's nothing special for white. But I didn't want to do that. Instead, most people play queen d8, transposing. After queen d8, bishop g5, this probably transposes to a main variation of some kind, but a kind of like passive one for black. So I played a new move here, bishop b4, but it's pretty logical, but computer didn't like it. My opponent couldn't find anything for white especially, but I'm probably going to have to give up the bishop, and I thought it's very similar to a Nimzo type of line, but computers, engines don't think that black has enough compensation for the bishop pair in most variations. So I was kind of disappointed. I thought that I would go home and the engines would say that black was fine, but actually it likes the two bishops while it's computer. I don't think that it's all that bad for black. Bishop b4 is a nice direct move. Anyway, I don't know what white's best move is here. It's hard to say. Maybe just a3. But it seems like kind of a semi-waste of time. So my opponent castle, I castle, and you're not going to believe that like I had a lost position in like a couple moves here. It's ridiculous. But white has a normal opening advantage. Probably like 0.3 tenths of a pawn. But that's, I guess, to be expected, when both sides play the opening like perfectly, so to speak. Here my opponent had to decide, and it's hard to find a move that seems like the best, but he finally decided on queen e2, which was perfect because I planned on transferring my queen to h5, especially once I saw queen e2. So there's no more bishop coming back to like harass the queen on h5. And I don't know why. I just thought I could save time. Wait till he played a3 or something and then do it. So this is okay. This is black's best move. And white has a small advantage if he finds the right move. My opponent couldn't find it in analysis, but this move is kind of computer-ish. It disrupts black and leaves white a little ahead in development after knight e4. Knight takes e4, bishop takes b4, knight takes b4, queen takes e4. And this guy is under pressure. It's hard for me to develop my pieces a little bit. But still, again, I think this 95 and not too bad for black, actually. We're not going to trade queens, I think. Take with a pawn if he trades. And that's probably the best plan, transfer the knight. Sorry, knight d5. But otherwise, the computer couldn't find anything special for white. You could do a3, and then black could go back. You don't have to. You can do this Karpovian like Nimzo plan with bishop takes c3. And actually, that was my intention. Pawn takes b6, followed by bishop b7. But the computer engine said that like after bishop d3, bishop b7, c4, it thought that I didn't have enough compensation. I was kind of hoping that I would have more, but maybe it's not so great for black. This actually suddenly looks like these two bishops can threaten maybe d5 in a timely moment, and I can't really generate as much pressure as I wanted against his hanging pawns. I thought, oh well, everything will be fine here, but in reality, maybe I was a little too optimistic. This is really a consensus on bishop b4, not about like if this opening is okay. It's another question, but I wanted to show you the complete game. So, I mean, the other thing is bishop d6. There's nothing wrong with that. Just that black still has to figure out how to develop the queen side. But anyway, that's what would have happened. Instead, I played this move, trying to be like stingy about tempi and complete my development and not wait until he plays a3 to basically execute my exchanges and the transfer of the queen. But it loses the game because after b6, bishop b5, and there are variations with the queen on a5 in the Nimzo Panov lines, and I think like Rustam Dautov plays those lines with that sometimes, but bishop on b4, bishop on a5, maybe I'm getting it confused with that, but anyway, I swear I saw this happen somewhere, this exact trap, and now he wins material because he's threatening a3 and he cut off my queen laterally. So, like, I was just going to resign now because it doesn't seem like there's any move. Any knight move, I mean, knight b8, I guess. And, but knight b8 allows a3. you know? And there's no getting out of that. After bishop takes, my queen is trapped. So I saw this one idea, the only chance, so to speak. It's like a mirage in the desert. After bishop takes c3, it looks unbelievable, but, so he takes back. And I play knight b4. And it's, again, the mirage in the desert, you're starving and thirsty, and you think you see, like, hope. But it's hard to believe that there's hope here, because my queen is so trapped. And I'm pinned to my own knight. But the point is bishop a6. But I really think he only had, like, one way to win this. Because he's tied down to this bishop on b5. He doesn't want to play a4. And I have another knight that can come to d5. So it's kind of a funny position. He found the way, though. It's pretty easy. a3. And then the point is that after bishop a6, he can't trade because I'll take with the queen and get myself, out of all the problems. But he finds this move, which I guess you'll find, if you have to, with bishop c4. And there's no way out. Now, for a minute, I thought there might be another mirage, with bishop takes c4, queen takes c4, but I resigned because the point is that after queen d5, the only move, he has queen takes b4, and it almost looks like his queen gets trapped, but he has this a4 square. Because after a5, I thought, well, queen takes b6, he really might get trapped after, like, rook c8. But the last possibility, like queen e7, I'm not even sure I can trap him there. But it looks like after this, it's easy out. So that's the end of the story.